I choose to be a Latter-day Saint because as a Christian, I can't find a more compelling story for what Jesus Christ is up to today.
We are Saints in the South, your source for gospel growth and good times.
All right. Let's welcome everybody to another episode of Saints in the South. As those of you who watch or listen to us know, we occasionally have interviews and have guests on the podcast that we get to have some interesting conversations with. And today is one of those fortuitous days. Our guest today is Jacob Hansen. Jacob grew up in a Latter-day Saint home. His childhood was immersed in playing football, baseball, basketball, boxing, hunting, fishing, trapping, riding horses. Good gracious. He was the son of a plumber and a stay-at-home mom who taught he and his 7 siblings to value faith, work, education, and our country. They wanted them to go out and make an impact on the world, and they led by example. His father now serves as state senator in the Nevada State Senate, and his mother was elected to the Nevada State Assembly. Jacob served a 2-year mission for the church in Argentina, where he said he fell in love with the country and the people and became fluent in Spanish. He attended both BYU and BYU Hawaii, eventually graduating from the latter with a degree in operations and supply chain management. Shortly after his marriage, he partnered with another BYU graduate, and after much effort, their company has grown to over 30 employees, and they continue to expand. Jacob is the host of the Thoughtful Faith podcast, whose mission is to strengthen faithful Latter-day Saints, feeling the pressure of the world by instilling courage and confidence in the reality of God, Jesus Christ, and the restoration of his church by contrasting truth and falsehood. He has had such guests on his podcast as Dr. Patrick Q. Mason, Greg Madsen, Dr. Ralph Hancock, Bridger Coburn, Dr. Christina Rossetti, Tom Stringham, and Blake Ostler. Jacob states that he embraces the notion that life is first and foremost to be lived, not just thought about. And so without further ado, Jacob Hansen.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. And, that was quite the introduction. I see you've been to the About page on my website.
Oh yeah, I totally ripped it off.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, real quick. So I actually served my mission in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Nice.
So, yep.
Nice. Was that back when it was Vegas East and Vegas West and it was the whole state?
Correct. Yes. Yep. So it was Las Vegas and then it was Las Vegas West. So I was on the east side, just Las Vegas.
I see.
So, yep.
Very cool.
Yeah, very familiar with Las Vegas and Nevada and everything.
Very cool.
So yeah.
Well, that's my homeland. My family first came to Nevada, and the Hansen name came in about 100 years ago. So we've been in the Reno Sparks area for a long time.
Very good. I served up in Elko for 8 months.
Oh, right on.
Yep. I was up there for a while, so pretty excited to hear that they are getting a temple.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Yeah. Well, again, appreciate you coming on. And so what we wanted to do was kind of, introduce you to our listeners. If you would just kind of give us a background of your upbringing a little bit, and, how heavily involved you were in the church, and, as far as serving a mission and everything, and kind of where leading into where you are today, basically.
Yeah. So I grew up in a kind of one of those classic Latter-day Saint big families at multi-generations in the church. And, everyone was a member of the church. That's kind of how it was growing up. But as I grew up, that sort of changed. But I had a wonderful childhood. Some people had rough childhoods. I didn't. I had a loving mother and father. I had friends and family. I mean, had the normal growing up challenges that people face, but overall,
parents,
what was that?
I said born of goodly parents.
Yeah, definitely born of goodly parents for sure. My parents and I still are very close, and they're amazing people. And so anyway, I just had a great childhood, and always in our family, there was kind of, the gospel was sort of this glue that sort of held us all together, despite any of the the normal challenges that we have. But as we know, as time goes on, I end up going on my mission. And at that time, pretty much everyone in my family was still pretty much active Latter-day Saint. And I had 3 people that were a big influence on me serving a mission. And that was my father, my older brother who had served, and also served in Argentina, actually, and my uncle. I had an uncle that I was close with who also had served. And I had other uncles who had served, but that one in particular. And by the time I came home, both my older brother and my uncle had left the church. So when I came home, 2 of the 3 people who inspired me to go on my mission really were gone, are no longer active in the church, and had in a way turned against it. And, I kind of got confronted with that reality. And I actually want to rewind just a little bit, because as of right now, of my 8 siblings, I'm one of 8 kids. So big old Latter-day Saint family. I'm the only one who's still active in the church. My parents are still active, but of the children, I'm the only one. And I've often wondered why that is. Why is it that I'm still active and others, even my older brother served a mission, isn't? And, as I've thought about that, I actually had a really interesting experience in the 7th grade that was unique. So I went to, and my siblings went to a lot of, we went to public schools, but we also went to private Catholic high school here in Nevada and Reno. And I had a great, wonderful experience there. But before I was able to get into that school, my parents wanted to get us out of the public schools. And so they were looking for Christian schools or religious schools that they could put us into. And there was a Baptist school, Protestant evangelical school that you guys in the South, I'm sure, know a lot about Protestant evangelicals. Right. And so anyway, I got put in one of their schools in the 7th grade. And as you guys probably know, being in the South, when you're a Latter-day Saint around a bunch of Protestant evangelicals, they have opinions about your beliefs.
Oh yeah.
Definitely a minority.
But here's what's crazy. It was great for me. Because I'll relate this experience first. I was being challenged on, even from teachers, by the way. I'm in 7th grade and I'm having teachers tell me, like, share with me Bible verses saying this is why you're wrong. And I remember one of them they kind of brought up was the one at the end of the book of Revelation. You can't add to the Bible. And you guys,
that's a classic.
Everybody knows that. Gosh, yeah. And all Latter-day Saints know the answer to that one, but yeah. I didn't. As a 7th grader, I was kind of like, oh man, like, what do we do? And I had this kind of almost mini faith crisis in the 7th grade where I was like, oh no, like, it says it right there. I don't know how, like, what am I going to make of this? And I went to my dad and I said, Dad, like, what do you think of this? And it's funny because he kind of laughed. He showed me, he goes, when the book of Revelation was written, did the Bible exist? And I was like, no. He's like, so what book is it talking about? I was like, oh, it's talking about the book of Revelation. And anyway, so I kind of, but it was, I had that experience where I faced a challenge to my faith that seemed insurmountable, but then there was an answer.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's like that with every single thing, but I came to kind of realize that, hey, there may be challenges that you don't know the answer to, but answers still exist. Right.
Yes.
And so I had that experience, but I also had the experience of defending my faith and learning pretty quickly in the 7th grade that our theology is very, very compelling.
Yes.
And very strong and can be well defended by the Bible itself. My dad introduced me after that to the topical guide. I didn't know what the topical guide was. Yeah. It was just something at the end of the scriptures, that is giant section. And I didn't, but my dad was like, look, like if they ever ask you something, go look in the topical guide. And what I realized was that the topical guide was essentially made during the era of the church when we were needed a reference for Bible bashing.
Right.
And you're on topical guide in any of the theological subjects that people bring up against the church, you can find great scriptures in the topical guide. And so I had my triple combination in my backpack, and I used to, when they'd ask me a question, I go look in the topical guide and I'd say, yeah, but what about this verse in the Bible? you know, like, oh, you can't be you guys believe you can be gods one day. It's like, well, what about this scripture that says we're joint heirs with Christ? And, and so I started learning that at a very young age, and I learned to sort of defend my faith. And none of my other siblings ever had that.
And this was in 7th grade?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, in the
That's
7th
amazing.
grade.
So you were obviously pretty advanced then, because I couldn't imagine doing that in 7th grade. I'd just been like, I don't know.
Well, I wasn't until I was always a little bit of a kid who was willing to, debate a little bit or have opinions. I was always that kind of a kid. But it was once my dad showed me that you can answer their issues using the Bible, I was like, because their whole thing was like, you don't conform with the Bible. And I was like, wait a minute here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, we have a really strong biblical case for our theology. And I grew to love the Bible. I'm a Latter-day Saint who, some Latter-day Saints kind of, that's sort of as far as it's translated correctly. And, they focus on the Book of Mormon and not to downgrade those at all. But I came to say, no, like, do not discount the Bible. It is full of gold. And while there may be some issues, it is definitely a powerful tool for.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I love about LeGrand Richards and Marvelous Work and Wonder. Basically said, the way we can test if the Book of Mormon is true is because we already know if we basically use the Bible as, a priori, we know this is true. Therefore, we compare the Book of Mormon with the Bible. And if the Book of Mormon verifies the Bible, then we know that it's also true. And it's kind of like, I liked how he used the Bible as the yardstick by which we can basically gauge all truth, so basically that's why it kind of makes me chuckle when people try to say Latter-day Saints aren't biblical, because I'm like, that's literally, the Bible is the basis of everything. That is the foundation of everything we do.
Yeah, no, the biblical, and Latter-day Saints, some of them don't care about biblical consistency. Joseph Smith did. And Joseph Smith spent a whole lot of time in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, interestingly enough, to make what was really a connection between those two. But at this young age, I had this experience of facing critique to the church from Christians. It was the Christian critique of the Latter-day Saint, of our theology. And then as I got older, then I kind of had to face something new. And this is the thing that I think we're facing more now. So I had already gained sort of my strength against sort of Christian critiques of the church. But when I got home from my mission, it was interesting because I kind of, on your mission, I dealt with a lot of the sort of, let's call them the Christian attacks on us.
Yeah, right.
And I felt very comfortable in handling those. And I think most missionaries do. But what we don't deal with a lot, and I think it's somewhat new, is this growing atheism. And so when I got home from my mission, my brother had really started to read a lot of the new atheist stuff. He had read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and some other stuff. And so, I wasn't so familiar with that side of the equation, right? Because it's a very different thing. And I talk about this in one of my videos that I know that you guys had looked at. But when you look at your belief system, like Kenny, you were just talking about how Latter-day Saints, if you accept that the Bible is true, then the Book of Mormon suddenly shines because of its consistency with the Bible. But what if you reject the Bible as well? What if you're coming from a place of atheism, of why should I believe in any sort of a higher power? And my take is that as a society, that's really the battle we're having. Historically, in the West, we've been a people of faith, let's say. We believed in God, and not only in God, but generally of some sort of a Christian flavor, right?
Yes. Yeah, basically the whole Judeo-Christian foundation for the entire Western civilization.
And so the Latter-day Saint message is a message about that. It's a narrative that speaks to that narrative to explain, hey, we all have this Judeo-Christian heritage that we believe in. what is that Judeo-Christian God doing today? Like, where does the story go on after the death of the apostles, right? And we're kind of like telling that story. And it's an extremely compelling story once you accept that story. But when someone's not even to that level, you have to reset the whole equation, because now you got to just get them to believe in a higher power at all.
Right. So whenever you came home from your mission and you see these relatives having left the church, and I think you said your brother, he was reading and did you ever reach that point of questioning of any kind? Because I think it's you said on your YouTube channel there over the 3-part series that over basically about a decade, you did a ton of reading all the way from the Christian philosophers to the atheism philosophers and so forth. So how far did you go, or did you ever even reach that?
So
Point?
I reached points where it was like, I was facing hard questions, but kind of drawing back to that 7th grade me, there was sort of, I've dealt with hard questions before and I've found answers. So I'm going to dig into this. But I think what is the difference for me was one of the big differences I see when people kind of have their faith crisis is I went down to the beginning first. So I went and I asked, why do I believe in God? Yeah. And I began to explore, like, are there good reasons to believe in God? And what's funny is that within our church, we don't spend a lot of our message, like our missionaries don't go out and begin to tell people why God exists. Like you start off the first lesson and it's like, you give a little shout out to like, hey, God exists. He's your father. Now let's talk all about Jesus and the Bible and the rest of it. Right. That's right. It's sort of like, because we kind of assume atheism is already there.
Yeah. Let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to share just a funny story with you real quick. I have to share this with you saying that. So in the MTC, just like you said, I mean, they're preparing you to go out and share basically the message of the restoration, assuming that people believe in God, for the most part. Well, on the very first day I was in the field, I had everything prepared, and in my mind, my trainer, we knocked a few doors. He said, all right, this next one's yours. I said, okay, all right, here we go. And I was fired up. I was, had everything ready in my mind. And I asked him, I said, do you believe in God? Fully expecting him to say yes, because I had my answer prepared for after that. He said, no, I don't. And I froze. I could not say anything. Nothing would come out. And my trainer sat there and just watched me for a second. And then finally he stepped in. But I had no answer. Had no answer for it. So anyway, so you could
and Latter-day Saints may have some answers to that, but like I don't think that Latter-day Saints have engaged very deeply in that, because historically that hasn't been what we've needed to do. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm not bashing the church per se. What I'm saying though is that as a Latter-day Saint, what I had to do is I had to go back and look at, well, who is making the compelling arguments for God? And what I found is that it's actually deeper within the Christian tradition, and even just within the general religious tradition in general, right? Now, he wasn't around when I was doing this, but someone like Jordan Peterson is an excellent example of someone who can show people from a purely kind of objective secular viewpoint of that this idea of God isn't just like, super or Santa Claus in the sky. Like there's some real meat to the idea of a belief in something higher. Now, at that time, who I actually listened to and really enjoyed was I started to listen to, because I had heard about the New Atheist guys, but then I found out there were these debates that they had with Christians, and people like William Lane Craig, who's one of my favorites, had these debates with some of the guys that my brother was reading, like Sam Harris, like Christopher Hitchens. And I watched him and he handled them. And he handled them pretty well. And he made really compelling arguments. And I didn't realize it, but he was drawing on even earlier Christian traditions from people like Thomas Aquinas. Yeah. And so I'm looking back and going, there's been this whole conversation that has actually been had in the past about, is it rational to believe in God in the West? And largely the West had sort of resolved that question. It had come to the conclusion like, yes, like believing in God is actually intellectually more compelling than is atheism. And I mean, we could talk an entire episode just on that sort of idea, but that was the foundation. That's the bedrock. Like, and I even say there's something even below a belief in God. And I say that the real start to a person's quest to sort of build their testimony, if from literally from the bedrock up, is to ask the question, what are you?
Yes.
It's actually not to ask a question about God. It's to ask, like, the one thing you know about is you.
Yeah.
And when you have people telling you that you are nothing, you have no agency, that you are basically a meat computer that acts on instincts with no free will. And I'm sorry, there is nothing that is more self-evidently false.
Yes.
Than that.
Well, the people alive today we've ventured so far away from those original roots that you're talking about. It's interesting to me how I really like the way you said that argument has already been solved. I mean, that debate, that point has already been established long ago, but most people alive today aren't even familiar with all these debates that happened, so many hundreds of years ago. And now we're just, there's so many people that have this idea of religion as being, the magical sky daddy who grants wishes. And like, obviously, if your idea of religion is a magical sky daddy who grants wishes, then yes, religion would be absolutely ridiculous. Yes, because that whole idea is ridiculous. That's just a ridiculous straw man. And, we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. I don't want to veer off, but, Jordan Peterson, that was a big thing for me. And that's first how I was introduced to you and the stuff that you're doing online and everything, because he really spoke to something. And I found out later on that it wasn't just me. It was, there's something that he was expressing things in such in ways that were making me go, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I think, but I've never been able to express it that way. I've never been able to put it into those words. And, I would get excited. I would get so fired up hearing Peterson talk, but like, yes, because there is something so much deeper. This religion it's not just, hocus pocus. It's not just a primitive explanation of the world. It's something so deep. And it makes me think of, you mentioned Santa Claus, because when I was a kid, I'm sure I know there was a time in my childhood that I believed in Santa Claus as, the guy in the sleigh that goes around, but I don't remember it. As far back as I can remember as a child, I cannot remember a time where I believed in Santa Claus as a literal being. It seems like as far back as I can remember, I've always believed in Santa Claus my whole life, but as far back as I can remember, I've understood that Santa Claus was an ideal. Santa Claus is not a fat man they're in a sleigh that goes down, the whole idea, it seems like as long as I can remember, I've understood that Santa Claus is the physical embodiment of an idea of selfless giving. Parents buy gifts for their children instead of saying, oh, look at this fancy gift I got you. They have this, magical person to put it off to give them an avenue to give selflessly, to not have to not take credit for what they've done. Mm-hmm. And so I know that's a little bit of a tangent there, but it's kind of like God, the idea of God is something so much deeper. It goes down to the most deepest, the core of who we are.
Well, I call this sort of, I call it the level 1 conversation. So I kind of break it up into 3 separate conversations. And these lead you to different conclusions, right? Each one, they build on each other. And you can't really have conversation 2 unless you've had conversation 1. And that first one is, the level 1 conversation is this idea that leads you to the conclusion that there is a God. And you ask questions like, who am I? Like, what am I? What is the purpose of all of this? Why is the universe here at all? Why is it organized the way that it is? Like, why do there seem to be regularities and patterns? And these are kind of deep, profound philosophical questions that if you go back to Plato and Aristotle and all the way back through Western history, like, this conversation's been going on. And frankly, it's fascinating to see the way people have grappled with this. And I believe that if you look into that, at least I did, I come to the conclusion having that conversation that there is something to this. There's like the world is not just a bunch of matter in motion. And that leads you to sort of this, at least opening the door to the idea of some sort of a higher power, right?
Oh yeah, there's
And-
so many things. Like when the Fibonacci sequence was, discovered by mathematicians. It's like it's something so beautifully eloquent that there's it transcends the logic of a chaotic system that just there's it seems impossible that this kind of complexity could just spring up out of nothing, and it does.
Absolutely.
Definitely beg the question of
And-
how did
and-
this happen? How did all this come about?
And people I really enjoyed a guy named William Dembski, who talks about this idea of specified complexity. It's basically the idea is it's not just that things are complex. It's that you have two independent patterns that match up. So I'll just give this real quick as an interesting example that I found really fascinating as I was going through this sort of process of understanding, like, is there any reason to believe in God? Well, you have one thing we want to know is how can you even detect if intelligence exists, right? Like, one way that you can do it is so some people have said, well, I would believe in God if God came and wrote like, "Hi, I'm God" in the clouds or something. It'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, like,
That'd
holy
be nice.
cow. Because but the thing is William Dembski actually breaks this down really interesting. He said, here's why that would make you think that there was an intelligence behind it. Because what you're looking at is you're looking at a pattern. Like, clouds make patterns all the time. And sometimes the probability of getting two clouds that are exactly alike is almost nothing. Like they vary in all sorts of subtle ways that they might be quote unquote complex. But what he points out is what's called specified complexity. In other words, it's a pattern of, in this case, clouds, which have a particular kind of normal distribution of patterns of the way that they are, that conforms to an independent pattern, right? So in this case, English language, it says, "Hi, I'm God," right?
Yes.
And we would initially we know, like, when you see that, you go, an intelligence myth. This is the same reason that when an archaeologist does this. An archaeologist, when they're looking at some rock, they know the normal patterns that rocks have. And rocks are very complex. You will never find two rocks that are the same. You can say they have all these molecules, all that kind of stuff. But when you find a pattern of rocks that conform to the pattern of a human form, you would say this is some sort of a statue.
Yes.
Right? Because you have the pattern of the human form then aligning with the pattern of a rock. And they're combining in this really unique way. And you have what's called specified complexity. So my thing is, I was studying all this stuff and reading William Dembski, and they point out is that our universe is rife with specified complexity. And the explanations for where that specified complexity comes from, such as in the sequences of the DNA code, which they have an explanation for how that came about, although there's plenty to argue about that. Very long other topic. But the thing is that there exists specified complexity in the universe, and that is based on what we know. The only known cause of high levels of specified complexity is some sort of an intelligence. And so the theory of something being intelligently designed, and people allow, it's a pseudoscience, all that, but they never deal with the actual arguments. And the arguments from people like William Dembski, from people like Stephen Meyer, if you actually listen to those guys' arguments, they're very compelling. And so again, when I was in this level 1 conversation, I was exploring, is there a rational basis for a belief in God, or is this just wishful thinking? And I found there's shockingly compelling reasons to say, I believe in God because of these evidences that seem to point in that direction. But
the patterns, it reminds me of when you were talking about that SETI, the SETI has invested billions of dollars into just looking for patterns. And that's all we're looking for is patterns.
Anyone who argues with the specified complexity argument, I say, you guys need to go talk to the people at SETI and tell them they're wrong. Yeah. Because SETI is literally based on looking for specified complexity in the patterns that you hear in the universe. And they're listening for patterns that conform to other things in a way that's highly improbable without intelligent intervention. And that's the way they search for intelligence in the universe. So this is totally scientific stuff. But it only, so what this does is I kind of went through this, what I call sort of faith remodeling, was I went through kind of this level 1 conversation. And I came away saying, I'm not an atheist. But the thing is that just because you believe, and I think a lot of people nowadays actually, I don't think that many people actually go to full-blown atheism. They go to some sort of a vague higher power notion.
Yeah.
And
More
Yeah,
of a
there's
agnostic.
yeah, and the thing is, we're all agnostic, because if they want to say agnostic means you're not 100% certain, well, it's like, congratulations, we all are. The question is where do you place your faith? Where are you conforming your behavior? What, like Peterson says, I act as though God is real, and it's like, okay, that is what faith is. It's to act as though this X is true. You're placing your trust that this particular proposition is true.
Yeah, I think we within all of us, whether we realize it or not, and I think getting back to, atheism and everything, there is an innate desire to have some form of spirituality in our lives. Whether we call that spirituality or refer to that spirituality as God, right, or Christ, something is inside each and every one of us, and and ultimately what we know that as is the light of Christ.
Absolutely. I heard a radio preacher. I can't remember who it was now, but many years ago say something that really stuck with me. He said that God has created every one of us with a God-shaped hole inside of us. There's a hole inside of us that can only be filled by God. And it reminded me of, like Jurassic Park, when they created, the animals with the lysine deficiency. So they're dependent on the lysine supplements in order to survive. It's like we are dependent upon God to survive. So we have this natural yearning to discover. Even if we don't know what it is, even if we can't put it into words, even if we don't have a rationalization for it, that yearning is there, and it's kind of built into us.
And I think that goes back again at this level 1 conversation to questions about who you are, like what you are. You recognize in you this thirst for something bigger than you, this spiritual hunger that exists within all people that you want to satiate, that you want to, Christ uses the metaphor of, the water of life that you want to take in. But the problem with a lot of people getting into this, okay, so there's a higher power, but not going any farther with it, is they end up, once you decide there's a higher power, we've now entered the world of theology. You're saying that there's something out there that we would give the title to God of, and there has to be, you have to start asking questions about, does this God intervene in any way in the world? Because here's the thing, if God exists, but he in no way is involved in all of this, well, then he may as well not exist. It's like, there's no function. There's no, like, he exists or he doesn't, like, who cares? Right. It's like saying that there's, there's a round stone inside the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's like, neat. Who cares? Yeah. Like, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't matter. So God becomes totally irrelevant.
If he's the blind watchmaker, it's irrelevant.
Exactly. Whether you could say, well, you can even say, aliens create us and then they all died. And it's like, okay, well, then that doesn't mean that there has to be some relevance to God's existence in your life. And so this is the level 2 conversation. The level 2 conversation is really about, okay, so what? God exists. What does that mean? And if God I want to know about the God who intervenes in the world, right? Like, yes. And so then you start searching for God in the world. And everyone throughout all of human history has searched for God in the world. And they've come up with various ideas about who God is and what his nature is. And that's where, and what's funny though, is you actually really only have certain serious schools of theological thought that have emerged over time. You have, in the modern world, you have Hinduism, you have Islam, you have Christianity. There may be some others, but like Judaism, there are only so many that really are and so you look at those and you say, okay, this, as all of human beings throughout all of history have sought for God, these are the general schools of thought that have emerged. And when you look into those, they're rigorous. Like, people have really seriously thought about this for a very long time. And so if, I have someone who I meet who's like, yeah, God, I believe in him. It's kind of like, this energy, dude. And I'm kind of like, you're just like making crap up. Right. Like, this isn't rigorous. This isn't deeply thought out. And it's probably incoherent and contradictory and all sorts of other stuff. Like, I actually want to delve into what's actually out there. And what I come across is, when you read the story of the New Testament, and again, this is, I think, where Jordan Peterson does some really interesting work at the second level of conversation, is he kind of is like, I just got curious about Western civilization and how all this sort of incredible civilization came about. And what I kept finding was like the Bible, like, and that these stories have shaped us. And then you go read, like, one of my big testimony builders is actually understanding the history of Christianity's influence on the world and how deeply influential. And I don't mean Christianity as in the churches that existed, but the Christian ideas found in the New Testament, and how incredibly, like, it's so profound how much they have impacted every aspect of the prosperity and good things that you see in the world around you.
There's a book, Jake. I want to say I've mentioned this on the Saints in the South podcast before, but it's funny because you could go on Amazon and buy this book for like $3 cheap now. It is one of the best books I've ever seen in my life. It's called After Jesus, The Triumph of Christianity, published by Reader's Digest. And it is just a factual account of the history of, like, Judaism, the world that Christ was born into, his life, his teachings, and how his teachings affected the world. And the book is really cool because most books about the life of Jesus either come from a perspective of faith or not. And you can kind of tell.
Yeah.
This one is really well done, because you don't know if the authors believe in the divinity of Christ or not. You really don't, because there's no speculation. It's all 100%. This is this. Jesus said this. This is what his disciples did. This is the impact that it had on the world. This is how the historical records of this and this and this civilization trace back to the teachings of Jesus. And
I'm gonna have to check that book out, because I'm actually on a kick on that exact subject right now. I'm actually working right now on a video for my channel, a series I'm going to make on this exact subject, because I think it's so faith promoting at the level 2 conversation. Because if you're going to look for God in the world, and you know the story of Jesus, and then you see the fruits of the story of Jesus, you go, if God interacted with the world, boy, I'll tell you what, that Jesus story, that I think I might place my faith in that one. And that's kind of where I got to in the level 2 conversation. There's actually, speaking of good books, there's a book by a guy named Tom Holland. Now, he's an atheist, not a Christian. And he kind of had this, and this is what this video that I'm making is about. He kind of had this thing where he goes, well, wait a minute. He was super into Greece and Rome. That's what he studied. That's what he was super fascinated with. And he always kind of identified with, Caesar and the Roman legions and the glamour and all that. And then he started actually studying it seriously as a historian, writing about it, all that. And he ended up kind of being like, I'm nothing like these people. These people are like aliens to me. They are so incredibly brutal. And just like, and he said the thing that was really scary was how for them, it was like, it was so normal. Right.
Yes.
And then he realized, well, if I'm not, the heir of the Greeks and the Romans and that, like, what am I? Where did all my values and ideas about the way I see the world, like, where does this come from? And he basically went, oh, it's like, I'm a Christian. Like I've adopted all of the Christian assumptions from the culture that I grew up in. Even though, and anyway, it's profound, the sorts of things that he goes into. I mean, even the notion of the secular and the religion being different things is not something that emerged in any other culture except for Western culture. And it emerged specifically because of the ideas of Augustine with the city of man versus the city of God, which he got from Jesus talking about my kingdom is not of this world, and the idea of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of man being something separate. And so that was what created the space for what we today call secularism, which he called the saeculum in their language, which was the division between the spirit, the ephemeral world stuff, and the secular. So when people even use the word secular, they're drawing on a Christian heritage. Their mind is so incredibly Christian. Their language is so incredibly ensconced in Christian ideas that they don't even realize it. And that shapes the way you think. That shapes the way you think of right and wrong. And anyway, all of this stuff.
It's. I just want to say something real quick, because what you're saying is so absolutely true. The entire philosophical perspective that our culture is built upon is so Judeo-Christian in nature that the atheists don't. It's hilarious when I have conversations with atheists who say, well, I don't need God to tell me how to be a good person. I can be kind to people, and they pride themselves on being good people, which is awesome. They pride themselves on their kindness and their generosity, which are, by definition, these are uniquely Christian values. It reminds me of the Vikings, for example. Like the Vikings, were seen as this bloodthirsty people because they just had a slightly different worldview. They weren't ensconced in this kind of Christian environment, so they believed in nature. They believed that you, to be a fully self-actualized person, you had to fully embrace your nature as a man. And for them, that was basically like a wolf. Like a wolf that doesn't hunt is not a good wolf. So if you want to be a good man, you need to conquer. And the Vikings would go into Europe, and these Christians, they'd have all these Christians in their little churches, and they would just bust in and just take over. And the Christians are like, oh, these horrible people. And the Vikings are saying, look at you, horrible people. You're horrible people. Well, you're not even living up to your ability. You're not living up to what you should be.
And that is very much the, so every human society, when you go back far enough, they all were that. They were, there was what you might call the conquest ethic. It was like, and Nietzsche wrote about this. He actually attacked the Christians and criticized Christianity for creating what he called a slave morality. So the original morality was the good was defined as the conqueror. Yes. And we all kind of have that impulse, right? It's sort of like, it'd be good. You go and smash things and you win and you're the champion, right? Like that's the good. But he said, no. These Jews who were totally the oppressed people, they warped it. They said, it's good to be meek. It's good to be a servant. And
that's
he's kind of like, this is loser mentality, right? You're idolizing being a loser. And so Nietzsche basically was like, you guys have embraced slave morality, and we need to, as a society, realize that we don't need to be like that. We need to embrace what he called the Übermensch, or the overman, or the Superman, the idea of embracing what you were just talking about, the Viking nature says, hey, you're never going to be fulfilled if you embrace this loser nature. Okay. And he essentially, his philosophy is that of the supremacist. The supremacist ethic is the ethic of the human by default. Christianity introduced into the world a universal human dignity that said, hey, you're not better than other people because you can beat them up. You're better if you use your power for good and for kindness and for charity and for nurturing and for building and for, that is the ultimate good. And so again, if I am searching for God at this level 2 conversation, Christianity suddenly has this really deep appeal. But again, all of level 1 and level 2 conversations that we've had, these are all conversations that we share in common with our Christian brothers and sisters. I am so happy that I was never afraid of Protestantism or Catholicism or Orthodoxy. I was very interested in understanding what the commonalities are, because here's what's interesting. Where our church during its history is focused very much on the third level of conversation, the level of, okay, Christ is in the New Testament is who he claimed to be. Now what? And we have an incredibly compelling message at that level, but we have not had the conversations at the lower level, but they have. And frankly, going back and studying and understanding the Bible, the way that Christians have debated these subjects, you're going to find that, like with me and William Lane Craig, we have significant theological differences. Like obviously we do, but we share the idea that being a theist is superior to atheism. And frankly, they have a rich tradition that we can dig into and read and understand to see how do they address some of these questions. And frankly, as I've done that and gotten to know other Christian writers, C.S. Lewis, there's a guy named John Lennox out there that's excellent, Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, and I started to see this atheism that I had been exposed to from my brother and from others. And I began to, it's very easy to take the critical lens to religion, but have you ever taken the critical lens to atheism? Because what you actually find is that atheism ain't as strong as a lot of people make it out to be. And I'm not saying there isn't a form of serious atheism out there that isn't worth contending with. It is, but you will find that it isn't that, oh, you have all these smart atheists and all these dumb religious people. Even though, believe me, there are dumb atheists and there are dumb religious people out there. But there are some of the most brilliant minds in our history were deeply religious. And like, I have serious theological issues with Thomas Aquinas, but Thomas Aquinas lived in the year like in the 1100s. And this guy, the level of intellectual rigor that he brought to the table is in like the Summa Theologica and other of his works are astounding. And the fact that we don't appreciate the work of those people and understand it, Latter-day Saints are entering, in my opinion, into a world and an arena that many of our Christian brethren have been involved in for a very long time. And it's becoming of us to understand it and to understand that not only do we have the restoration of the gospel, which is its own sort of narrative within Christianity, but we have the Christian tradition to also lean into that can provide us with resources for combating atheism and secularism.
Yes. And so I want to say so really quick, Jacob, that is something that you have said that I really like, that I don't know if this was your original thought, but I've never heard anyone else make the distinction of what you call the serious atheist, because there's atheism in general, but then when you talk about serious atheists, that really struck me the first time I heard you use that phrase, because there are people like I have friends, who are atheists, and there are some who, like to throw around the magical sky daddy arguments. And I just kind of roll my eyes because they're either unwilling or incapable of engaging at a higher level than that. But then the atheists, it's the same way. The religious people, the atheists, but then there's the atheists who are serious, I've spoken with atheists who know religion better than most religious people I've ever talked to. And those people are really interesting to talk to. They've actually thought it through. There's a lot of atheists. In my opinion, I'd be willing to bet that the majority of atheists today have not thought their worldview through completely.
Yeah, and I would say that,
like you said, they've not applied the same rigor to the lack of faith, to the no God argument that they have to the argument for that of a God.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And it's just a sort of a numbers game. Most people are not that intellectually rigorous. Okay. Most people, even religious people. And the thing is that obviously you're going to get, what do you get? You get some sharp atheist who's talking to some wild-eyed Christian fundamentalist who's, making no rational sense. And they're like, look at this is religious people. You know what I mean? It's like,
yes.
Dude, if I want to go and like get in a fist fight with a 5-year-old, like I'm going to look really tough. You know what I mean? Like, please, you need to look for the best arguments from each side. And it's surprising. And a lot of atheists are like, well, there aren't any good arguments for religion. It's just like, you're just demonstrating you don't know what the heck you're talking about. Okay. Because even the serious atheist will admit, like, there's some really smart, theologians out there that will put us on our toes to where we got to really come up with good arguments here. And so it's a much more level playing field than a lot of people realize. And for me, the line with the serious atheists versus what I call the pop atheists, most atheists are actually humanists. So atheism, they'll say, is just a lack of belief in God, which is like, fine, whatever. Like, I don't believe in unicorns. That doesn't mean me an unicornism. It is, I want to know, well, what do you believe? Right? Because you live your life, you go and make choices, you have values. Like, are these all just arbitrary, made up nonsense? Or do you actually have a philosophy upon which you base the way that you live your life? That's why I care what you believe. Because once I know what you believe, I can understand what sort of are you going to be a Viking who's going to go and kill everyone? Or are you going to be, someone who I have something in common with and can have a relationship with? And most atheists are humanists. Okay. Which means they put human beings at the top of the hierarchy of what matters. But if you press humanism, it's like, wait a minute here. And more than one scholar has pointed this out. Humanism is just Christianity without any theological roots. And when you take away the roots, you don't get the fruits. Like, it's very hard to have humanism because humanism has to assume the special place of human beings. And they have no grounding for that. They just presuppose it out of thin air. And so, again, it isn't intellectually rigorous. And that's why I consider those atheists not to be serious, because they haven't really thought through the arguments there. And so to kind of sum up the story of where I went, I went through from the ground up with my testimony, where most people, they don't realize it, but they've adopted atheistic assumptions about the world and about their epistemology and what constitutes what's true and what isn't. And then they apply that to the story of Joseph Smith or something, and they can't reconcile it. Where for me, it was like, all right, even if Joseph Smith wasn't who he claimed to be, I'd still be a Christian, because I had this independent sort of testimony of Jesus Christ. And the reason I believe in Jesus Christ is because I believe in God, right? And so there was this foundation beneath me where it was, I believe in God because of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here, some higher power, which led me to Jesus Christ. And then from there, I went to Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
And because Joseph Smith's story without that foundation, it's nonsense. It's crazy. Of course, like, I don't blame the atheist guys for being like, that Joseph story is nuts. Like, yeah, dude, but you know what? Calculus seemed insane to me until I understood algebra.
That's right.
Yeah.
Another thing really quick, the atheists, most atheists, we've talked about, they don't apply the same level of intellectual rigor to the atheistic worldview as they do to that of a Christian or religious worldview. Whereas the same is what I've seen from most Protestants. I've seen all these people, and you had a recent interview with an individual, I think exemplifies this in a way, have applied pretty harsh critiques to the Book of Mormon, to Latter-day Saint theology, but have not applied anything close to that level of scrutiny to the Bible or to Christianity in general.
Well, and I'm really big on the idea of a steel man. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really big on this. You need to understand the best argument from both sides of the equation. And I advise Latter-day Saints, though, to be careful about this, because what you do is, I want you to first go find the best arguments for our belief, then begin to engage with the other side. Okay. Because if you haven't engaged with the best rational arguments for why the restoration is what it is, which, by the way, you shouldn't even care about the restoration until you've established a belief in God and Jesus Christ that's just rock solid. Because at the end of the day, that's what the whole restoration is built on, those premises. So I have found that most people's problems are not with the restoration. It's that they don't believe in God, or they don't believe in Jesus, and they don't believe it in any sort of meaningful way. They have adopted the cultural assumptions that have rotted away the Judeo-Christian foundation that acts as the thing that makes the restoration shine. And so that's why people leave the church. They don't all go and join the Catholic Church or become Baptists. They all leave and become atheist agnostics and or what I call vague spiritualists.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that with individuals that find themselves leaving the church based on, issues that they find with Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon and things like that. Is your recommendation to go back first to their faith and belief in God and Jesus Christ?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's if I could give one advice to someone who's struggling with Joseph Smith, is to say, hold on, stop. Do you believe in God? Tell me about this God you believe in. And what you'll find is that they probably will say, yeah, I believe in God. And then they'll say, okay, do you believe in the Jesus Christ of the New Testament? Like, do you believe that that's a legitimate thing? Have you ever really investigated that? Like, who are you? do you really believe that you're a child of God? Like, the thing is, their problem is so much deeper 95% of the time.
Yeah.
Because anyone who believes in the story of the New Testament, the question isn't, was Joseph Smith a prophet? The real question is, well, which church should I be a part of? Where is Jesus Christ today? Right? But that's not what they're asking.
Yeah.
Right? They're not like, I choose to be a Latter-day Saint because as a Christian, I can't find a more compelling story for what Jesus Christ is up to today. I just can't do it. And I've listened.
Agree. So how, Jacob, do you account for those who leave the church and do join, Protestant evangelical denominations?
That is
that's a whole different story.
Well, the thing is that what I found, and I have a relative who has sort of more, I mean, they still attend those churches. I found that they don't actually like I ask them, like, do you really believe in the Trinity? Like, do you embrace that everyone who doesn't confess Jesus with their mouth is burning in hell? Do you still believe, like, again, the level 2 conversation is where that goes, right? It's the theological questions. What I found is that most people's problems aren't even at the theological level, because then they would be that. And now if someone does go and join it, that's where I'll want to know, like, have you, and if they have, like, I know someone who did actually go, they've joined the Catholic Church and they fully embrace Catholic doctrine. I'm actually like, hey, that's better, in my opinion, than falling off the Christian wagon altogether.
Yes.
And not only that, I think your kids will probably one day have my kids come and talk theology with them. And if your kids have any sense, they'll anyway. That's
Yeah. It seems though those who join, who leave the church and become like the evangelical Christian, they become, what I call quote unquote true Christians and the real Jesus and all this kind of stuff. It really, obviously I'm biased, but I have studied religion a lot in my own life as well. And I have attended other different churches and different denominations, throughout the years. And it really, to me, seems like a step backwards. And I know a lot of people might be offended by that. And I don't mean it to be insulting, but like you said, there really is, once you understand the theological arguments, in my opinion, one of the most compelling reasons for me at this point in my life to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that it is the most intellectually compelling argument. I really, like the things you mentioned, when you talk about the Trinity, when you talk about
on that level of theology, on that level, again, but framing it as these 3 separate conversations, because you're only having the theological conversation once you've had that even more basic conversation about the existence of God and a higher power and all the rest of it. And that's like you said, it is a step backward theologically.
Yeah.
Like and every Latter-day Saint knows. And that's why most of the time, if you go talk to Latter-day Saints who've left the church and are attending some other church, ask them about the theology. Ask them if they, because what separates our church from theirs is ultimately is theology, right? We both believe in the basics of Christ, the New Testament, and God. But what you'll find is that they will not convince you that they have a better theology now.
No. And there's so much inconsistencies. Like, one of the big things when I was attending evangelical churches, every single Sunday, every evangelical church I've attended, the message was, you must confess Christ. You must accept Jesus Christ and be saved, or the moment you die, the second you step into eternity, you will be in hell. You will be damned forever. And there's no way. And that's why the evangelicals are so evangelical, why they're so persistent, because they do believe that if in that moment, if you live your entire life, however, here's the consistency. Hold on, but here's the consistency.
Oh, go ahead.
One thing that really started standing out to me is I've been to a lot of funerals, and there's every single preacher, every single Sunday, they're like, you must accept Jesus Christ, or that moment you step into eternity, you will be damned forever, all eternity. And then I attend the funeral of a person who never, ever in their life confessed any faith in Jesus Christ. And then the preacher says, oh, they've gone on to be with the Lord. Oh, they're in the arms of Jesus now. And I'm sitting there thinking, which one is it? You can't have it both ways. I mean, because it would be awkward to preach a funeral and say, well, your father is now burning in hell for all eternity, and that's where he's going to be in eternal torment and suffering. Sorry, I tried to tell him. Nobody wants to do that. But it points out to me, it really highlighted the inconsistencies of their theology.
Yeah, and ultimately that's why I've never felt a very big threat in our current culture from other churches that are out there. They're not, they don't pose a significant threat to the faith, in my opinion, with their theological arguments, because anyone who's been a missionary and who's dealt with those theological arguments recognizes that they just aren't that. To anyone who's actually studied it, there's a lot to it. However, there's an even more fundamental level at which the church is being assaulted today. And it's an assault. That's, if you notice, it isn't the Latter-day Saints that are losing all their members. It's Christians as a whole, which says, you guys, the attacks aren't on any theological point of view. The attacks are on theology as a concept.
Yes.
As it's illegitimate to believe in God. And the reason I often say that Jordan Peterson is the current greatest missionary, bar none, in the world, is because he's having that conversation at level one. Now, some people are like, well, why isn't the church out doing that? I don't know that it's necessarily the church's responsibility per se to do that. Our message is that of the restoration. I look at who's responsible for that level one conversation is Christians everywhere. And not only Christians, theists everywhere, to confront the intellectual bankruptcy of a belief in nothing, in like agnostic atheism. And so as I look at it, I think if saints are more aware of what's actually going on, and I think they're becoming more aware. Like I'm hearing saints talk about, man, I really got a lot of that Jordan Peterson guy, or they're starting to look outside of our tradition a little bit to gather resources to confront what is attacking us. But if we don't identify what the real enemy, what the real attack is right now, that's eroding not just our church, which is facing challenges, but all religion everywhere. And I think we're starting to. I think I have this weird inkling that there's sort of a religious awakening happening where people are starting to go. Now, I don't think people are all running back to traditional religion, but I think that the new atheist sort of movement had its day. And now a lot of people are moving from atheism, at least to sort of, well, I believe in something. I don't know what. But like, we're like way ahead of that. We're like, well, we'll tell you that something is Jesus Christ. And let me tell you what Jesus Christ did.
Right. I think two points that you've made in the past as well, I think gets to what you're kind of talking about now is the one, you talk about bad ideas equaling as viruses, right? Mm-hmm. And then the internet acting as today's public square. And one of the reasons that we started our podcast was to put more good information, more faith out there into the public square. And I think that's what's happening. More and more good people, Christians, see what is happening, and they are more willing to get involved, which is what is needed to kill the bad ideas.
Absolutely. Well, I look at it as modern day missionary work. Back in the day, you'd have, they'd go in the public square, they'd stand on their soapbox, and Dan Jones would, do his thing. Now, I'm not saying there isn't still a need for kind of traditional missionary work, but I think that what you guys are doing, what I'm trying to do, what, a lot of Latter-day Saints that are in this space online are trying to do is basically they're trying to preach the gospel. Yeah. We're trying to get into where the people are and where they will actually listen. And we're trying to put out the message of the gospel against the contrary messages that we see in the world. And so in my mind, I think that, but I also recently have been dealing with there's sort of some people kind of get on my case. Now, granted, I'm kind of a firebrand online a little bit, and so, but I make a distinction because what's really interesting is that people that actually know me personally and then engage with me on a level of what I call private ministry, like if you were to ask them, is Jacob a nice guy? They'd be like, yeah, like super nice, all that kind of stuff. But that's when I'm engaging in private ministry. There's a difference between private ministry and public advocacy. Public advocacy it's sort of this game in the public square of contrasting opinions, battling for dominance in the world of ideas, right? And I very much put this out there is in the world of ideas, it's a full-blown war. And in war, you identify the enemy and you destroy the enemy. Okay. But remember, I'm talking about ideas. I'm not talking about people.
Yes.
I don't want to go and destroy someone. But I'll tell you, if you are the person in the public square standing up tall and spouting nonsense ideas, I'm going to rip your ideas apart because those ideas are dangerous. As you said, they're like a virus and they spread. And someone at some point needs to be the antibody that comes in and knocks that idea out. But that is in the world of public advocacy. I would never say some of the things that I'm saying to actually convince the person who's sitting across from me in a private conversation. And in fact, private ministry has very little to do with argumentation at all.
Right.
It has to do with a spiritual experience that you have together that usually involves very little when it comes to words. And any of us who have been a missionary, you've been involved in private ministry. When you sit down with the converts and you pray with them and you sing, I am a child of God in their home, and you do things like that. And you immediately learn as a missionary, and I learned this the hard way, is that I thought, oh man, I'm going to have these great arguments and things like that. And then I got out there and was like, that doesn't work. Like what works is like when you develop relationships with people,
the personal,
help them to feel the Spirit, and then they want to change their life.
Right.
And so you have to draw that line between public advocacy, which has an entirely different set of strategy, and Jesus with the woman at the well with a private conversation, right?
That's an excellent
Jesus
point.
very much did that.
I think that's a point that far too many people are missing today. They want to conflate the two together, and it's it doesn't work that way. One of the things that I'm talking about Peterson now, so I've been kind of chomping at the bit a little bit, to get into talking about Peterson a little bit more. But one of the things that I heard him say that just blew my mind, I literally had to pick up my phone and stop the podcast and say, "Whoa, what did he just say?" He said, when the first time I heard Peterson say that people do not have ideas have people. Yep. Man, I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it. It blew I literally had to stop and say, "Holy cow, what is he saying?"
What's funny? Oh
my! It changes everything.
That isn't even his idea. I think he's pulling that from Carl Jung. And what's funny is that when you actually listen to Peterson, realize that most of what Peterson is saying, when I first heard Peterson, it was funny. I kind of was like, "What's the big deal?" Because I felt like he was saying things that I kind of had already had heard to some extent. These weren't, he was saying things that are familiar, but he was using different language to say it. And what it is that Peterson is drawing ideas, and he even admits this, like, I'm just drawing ideas from the Western tradition.
Yes.
And that's part of the thing that makes you go, like I said, we've had this conversation before. He's saying, hey, everybody, we had this conversation. Let's talk about it because it's actually incredible. And then he does it in language that is modern and secular.
Right.
And so there's very little that Peterson puts out that is actually original thought. And I don't mean that at all derogatory, because I mean, he has said himself, he borrows from Jung, he borrows from Nietzsche. And that's in a way, really, to me, the mark of a good thinker, someone who is well-read, someone who understands what these other intellectual giants, these people who have had these amazing these amazing thoughts and these amazing just gosh, I'm trying to think of how to term it. Like they've wrestled with all the difficult ideas and take pieces of this and pieces of that and put it all together and say this makes sense, and Peterson has created a worldview that makes sense, where he's borrowed from all these other people that have put in the work, the intellectual work of battling with ideas.
And he is, and so what Peterson did and what a lot of us don't do is you got to look around and go, we live in like a magical world. Like you and I are having this conversation using this kind of technology with unbelievable, like bellies full of food and like,
yes.
How did this happen? Because if you actually study human history, it's like, it ain't like this.
Right.
And you have to go, what? How did this come about? And what he did is he said, well, I'm going to go look and try and figure out, like, what are the ideas? Again, if ideas sort of shape human history and human behavior, what are the ideas that people have had in their head over the course of history? And some of those ideas, as he rightly points out, are dark and dangerous and terrible and lead to millions of people dead. Yes. And others cause untold prosperity and happiness, and he does this excellent job of just exploring psychologically the way that ideas in Western history have molded the way that we think, the way that we look at the world. And he rightfully points out that those who denigrate things like the Bible as a bunch of superstitious nonsense are totally missing the boat. And again, as someone who's exploring the level 1 conversation, seeking this God, seeking this sort of, is there this, there seems to be something more. What is it? Boy, I tell you what, that sure seems compelling to me, that if I got to place my faith somewhere, which I do. And I want to make that quick point, actually, just to kind of segue off of that. Again, Jordan Peterson points this out, but it's funny because it's actually rooted in the scriptures. Yeah. We all place our faith somewhere. He says, what you say you believe, like, I don't care what you say you believe. I care, what do you do? Your behavior manifests what you really believe. Another way of saying that is that your faith manifests what your faith is in. In other words, by their works,
you shall know. That's right.
You shall know, like, their faith is manifest through their works. There, we have that classic discussion about faith and works. He's just saying the same thing. He's saying, if you want to know what someone actually believes, look at what they do. And so what happens is when you do that, you start going, holy cow, what we do is predicated on what we believe. Man, ideas really matter. And what are the ideas that have led to what we have today? And it's traceable. And what are the ideas that I individually, what am I placing my faith in? That isn't a question of sort of intellectual. It's like, what does my behavior betray that I actually have my faith in? And what should my behavior betray based on what I want to be and where am I placing my trust? Right? Because you can never have, this is another thing that I think is a major, it was a game changer for me. You only have so many options of things you can place your faith in. You only have, like, you've got to have some, like, you're going to place your chip somewhere. And the question is, where? Are you going to place it on atheistic determinism and that? Do you act that way? Is it even possible to do that? Am I going to place it in Protestant theology? Am I going to place it in, Hinduism? Where am I going to place my faith and base my life around? I have to throw down my chips somewhere. And often my thing is to anyone, it's like, send your missionaries, dude. Like, if you got a better place for me to place my chips, I'll throw my chips there. But this is the best that I've found. It's sort of like there's like that funny thing about America. It's like, America's the worst country in the world, or democracy is the worst thing in the world, except for every other option. Mormonism is a joke, except for every other option. You know?
That's one of the reasons I point this out a lot in conversations with people, that here in the South, there's literally churches that have Sunday school classes, quote unquote, basically talking about why Mormons are wrong and, we're all going to hell and this and that and the other. And they spend a lot of energy trying to tear down the church and trying to dissuade people from even entertaining, talking to us really. And we don't do that. And that's one of the things I know that every single Latter-day Saint Sunday school class, elders quorum meeting, sacrament service is very careful to not denigrate other people's faith. And my opinion is the reason for that is because there's nothing better. We're not threatened by any other worldview. We're not threatened by other people's beliefs because we have the best thing there is. That we've got the best game in town, in my opinion. If you really examine theology deeply, if you examine all the different theological constructs, I really do feel like this is the, quote unquote, thinking man's religion. That's how I think of it, because if you approach things critically and logically, it really does make sense. And if you approach it that way, there's no reason to be intimidated by other people, who try to criticize the church and try to present a different worldview or a different theological structure, because there's nothing better. There's not a better game in town.
Well, and I look at right now with, I love, it's funny because a lot of people will see me really, I have debates with Christians and that kind of stuff on my channel. I love my fellow Christians. I am it's funny that I've become really good friends with like the two guys that we did the debate with at Apologia Church, which is extraordinarily hostile to the church. And they themselves, go out and preach the anti-Mormon stuff. We become very good friends as we've discussed theology together and gone through all this. And frankly, what I would love to have happen within Christendom generally is, I think there is need for theological discussion and debate, but right now it's like, you guys, we all are facing the same thing. It would be much better for us all to turn our efforts into safeguarding our youth and those who are coming up and equip them with the ability to withstand the forces of secular atheistic humanism that are really perverting the youth in the church and drawing people away. And so to me, like my call to when I do call them my Christian brothers, like at the end of the day on the big fundamentals, we really, there's much little between us besides theology, which does matter, but these issues are much deeper than that. And they're the present danger right now to any person in faith.
Yeah. That reminds me, I had a really, really close friend that, we knew each other growing up, we were both partying and doing all of our stupid things. And we kind of lost track of each other. And then, I kind of ran across him one day, and after we both were in a position where we were single fathers and business owners. And so we both kind of bonded and, started really hanging out a lot. And he was and is a devout Southern Baptist, hardcore devout Southern Baptist. And I had, not too long before come back to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he and I spent a lot of time together. Our sons were the same age. Like I said, we were both single fathers raising our sons. We were both business owners, and we talked a lot. I mean, we hung out almost daily and would talk about how our faith affected our parenting, how we tried to be a good father based on our faith, and how our faith informed the way we conducted business. And everything, like 99% of everything we believed was pretty much identical. And that might sound weird, but because there are very significant differences, between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints theology and Southern Baptist theology. However, where the rubber meets the road, as far as how your faith influences your life and how your faith influences the way you raise your children and the way you interact with other people, it's very much the same. And that was an interesting thing for me to realize.
Absolutely.
I've began seeing and thinking about this war of ideas that we are having and seeing right now, almost as a type of World War III. We always think of physical battles, and conquering when you talk about wars, but in the end, ideas and bad ideas can bring about great destruction among people. And so that's really what I'm seeing in these last days. Is almost a World War III of ideas, and that's how World War III is going to be bought or fought. My son two nights ago, my 11-year-old son, he asked me, he said, Dad, what if we're wrong? Talking about our faith and restoration, it was a very good question. It caught me off guard a little bit. I said, first of all, I said, if we are wrong, I said, we're still right, because our belief and our faith is based in God and in Jesus Christ. And in the end, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And it is ultimately, I've looked at it with a lot of, even the Christians who say that we need to confess Christ and believe in him. It's like, you know what? Well, I believe in confessing Christ. I have some theological differences with you, but no two people have the same theology. And at the end of the day, when it comes to the greater Christian community, I have found that trying to understand them and to really listen to their theology and steelman it, there's immense power in that idea of a steelman. If you take the time to give me your best argument, and I'm not going to try and respond to it. I want to make sure that that if someone asks me, what do Baptists believe, that I could give them just you would be standing by me going, wow, that was great. You got it, man. You understand it. Because what that does is just on a relationship level, you appreciate it when someone listens. If someone was to listen to you explain the church's theology, and you were to repeat back to them, and they were to ask great questions and really, so this is what you're saying. And that person were to explain to another person our beliefs with precision and clarity and really nail it, that would affect you. A, you'd respect that person.
Mm-hmm.
And B, you might be willing to listen to what they have to say. Because you're like, this person understands what I believe, but they don't believe me. Now, sometimes it's conversations I like to have with people. I just like to say, look, let's not try and resolve our differences. Let's just explore what they are. And how meaningful, and you get to a point, you say, okay, tomato, we've arrived at a point to where you believe X, but if you were to have a conversation with someone and really try and understand what they're getting at through the doctrine of the Trinity, without the intention to try and correct them, you could really come down to understanding the nature of that disagreement rather than seeking resolution. Just seek understanding, and you'd be amazed at, first of all, how often you find that your differences aren't as big as you thought they were. That they have a very interesting point of view to consider that you may reject, but that you can at least respect as this isn't just cheap, it isn't that they haven't thought about it. I may disagree, but I can respect the intellectual exercise that you've put into this. Right. And ultimately you end up having an edifying experience, exploring to understand and being curious about what other people believe. And in some ways, it's when you do understand the real steelman of someone else's point of view, and it doesn't affect you in a sense, it's you become more confident that look, I've heard the best that they have to offer. They even said that was the best. I repeated back to them. They're like, yep, you got it. And it didn't cross the line. Then it's well, now it's a win-win. Either you learn something new where you gain maybe they'll convince you the Trinity's right. And then you can come convince me. but either you will come away with greater truth, or you will come away realizing that the truth that you have supersedes what they've presented. And that's either way you win. And you end up making a friend in the process because they really enjoy being listened to. So when interacting with our Christian brothers, my thing is to listen, to find the commonalities, but also to enjoy the contrasts that are there without having to fix them, because you don't.
That's a good point. Yeah,
that's great. I like that.
Very good.
So I want to say something real quick. So there's a lot of things we've been talking about that I feel like are kind of connected here. I was thinking about Jackson talking about the, World War III, this war of ideas and words, and, the ideas as a virus, and Jacob talking about how amazing it is that we're having this, we're sitting here, we're how far apart, we can be in different, we could be around the world. Like we could literally be, one of us could be in China, one of us could be in Uruguay, and one of us could be in Canada, and we could be having this conversation just from the comfort of our own homes. And going back to the importance of some of the things that Peterson has been talking about, I really feel like right now we are on the precipice of a kind of a spiritual awakening, and it's because, and I apologize for my stumbling, I'm trying to formulate this idea, but I really feel like we as a species are advancing so quickly now that we, like, the definition of evolution is any creature that has evolved to fit its environment, to survive optimally in its environment. And we are, human beings are living in an environment that we're not well suited for, that we're not evolved to handle. We're living in a world that none of us are equipped, and it's evolving so fast that none of us can keep up with it. And so in the past, there was these, the ideas spread differently. I feel like we're on the verge right now of ideas of a major evolution of some way, whether it's a spiritual awakening or something, because like Peterson talks about YouTube, how great it is that he can get on YouTube and just talk to people all over the world. Like Joe Rogan right now literally has the largest audience of any human being that's ever lived. And he's Joe Rogan. Yeah. He's this meathead. And I mean, I say that playfully because I like Joe Rogan.
I'm a meathead.
Yeah, he is. He gives me wedgies. Jackson's a bully. but we are, we're living in this world where one person can have such a voice. Joe Rogan has a larger audience than any emperor, any king, any person that ever lived, any prophet, anything. And it's this technology has made it possible for ideas to propagate in a way that has never been seen before in all of human history. And so we feel like kind of we're stumbling around trying to find our equilibrium. And how do we operate in this world? How do we operate in this world where ideas are so easily spread, where any person in the world can just get online and talk and potentially reach millions of people all around the world?
It's funny because this happened once before in a smaller way. So information now just exploded again. What happened, the original explosion of information happened when the printing press came about.
Yes, the Gutenberg. Jordan Peterson has talked about this as the next Gutenberg, but it's bigger than the Gutenberg.
Exactly.
Revolution.
And that revolution changed the world, right? It was that, and interestingly, what was being printed on those presses, it was the Bible, and specifically the New Testament. And that is what largely led to both the Reformation spread and then the spread of the Enlightenment, which happened because of it. And so there was an enormous move forward in the progress of the truth, largely in the West, off the through the Judeo-Christian ideas being spread more thoroughly. And so this is the new sort of printing press, as it were. And we are, I believe, facing people now, the common man who used to just, go and plow his field, and he had his religion, and it was just kind of what he grew up with, and there was never any challenge to it or any of that. Like now, that ain't the world we live in. And so we live in a world where everyone now is having to suddenly ask these existential questions. These, the level one conversation is being brought to the world, like it or not, ready or not, here it comes. You're going to have to be faced this. That's why, Jackson, your 11-year-old son is asking some of these questions.
Right.
You know what I mean? If he had lived in 1732 in some farm in Upper England or something, he probably would have just been like, hey, Dad, I need to milk the cows. Like, he wouldn't have been thinking about if his religion is right. But we live in this hyper information age. And so I think you're right. I think we're both on the cusp of something. But also I think it echoes the reason that, look, in the battlefield of ideas, like enormously good or bad things can happen. And so like the saints need to pay attention,
Yes.
and they need to be ready to engage in the public sphere and preach the gospel within this new sort of context that we find ourselves in. I think my main thing to anyone, you know, we live in a time right now where obviously a lot of saints they're beginning to ask those level, they're beginning to struggle sometimes, I think, with their faith, but they need to recognize that that's happening because of a greater context of you just are probably examining your faith in a serious way for the first time ever. And oh, by the way, your great great grandfather never had to do this because he didn't live in a hyper information age like the one that we live in. And so it's what I tried to do in the video series, the 3-part series that I put out, was to sort of not to give answers per se, but to frame what's going on, because that was so helpful for me, was to sort of frame that what's actually happening is that all of belief in general, these big questions, I need to go down and dig deep into these. And I need to look, and if I'm going to look for answers, I need to look for the best answers that are out there. And for a lot of us, that means you're going to have to go outside of the borders of the, LDS.org. Like that is our church's particular message to a particular audience, but these are bigger questions. And not to say there aren't resources on these from the church, they do exist. They just aren't the primary focus of the church. And anyway, I just encourage anyone who's listening that maybe is trying to sort through their faith, ask yourself who you are. Ask yourself if you're just a meat computer programmed by the laws of nature to reproduce and then die. Like, are you something more than that? And if you are, what does that mean? Right? What is the purpose of life and the universe? Where are you going to place your chips? What are you going to use as the basis for the way that you live? I think when you start to have, if you're going to have to re-examine kind of your worldview, which all of us have to do in this age of hyperinformation, do it the right way. Go from the bottom up and don't abandon the church as you do that. I called mine a faith renovation. It wasn't a faith crisis. I just had to go through and replace some plumbing and examine the foundations and strengthen them and read some things. And as I did that, I came away with a fully sort of refinished faith that still is going to need routine maintenance. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right.
But it's been an experience that has led me to a place of peace on the other side of complexity, because you face the challenge of complexity and things that you don't understand or questions that you have, and then you go through the process of finding the answers. And on the other side, there is great peace, although there will always be things that we don't know and we're not sure of. But my kind of testimony is that the Lord will help you in this process if you seek sincerely, and there's beautiful and wonderful resources out there for everyone.
Well, very good. We appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I have found, just to tag on to that really quick. I know I have found it to be true that what you seek for is what you will find. I was baptized at a young age, and not to get into my whole story, but I spent many years in the great and spacious building, and got to see a lot of what the world had to offer. And so there's a whole, I could talk for another hour about my own journey. But at a certain point, when I came back to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for the first time in my life, I did some serious examining, and I found my opinion that I formed at that time, that has been strengthened since then, is that what you look for, you will find. If you want to find things that will tear down your faith, you'll find them. They're there.
Yep.
If you want to find things that are going to build your faith, you will find them. They're there.
Absolutely.
Very good. Yep. Well, hey, Jake, if people want to follow you, what's the best way to do that?
Best way is probably the YouTube channel. If you just search for Thoughtful Faith, that's probably the best place. You can subscribe there. You can also check out my website, thoughtful-faith.com, and that has links to blogs that I've written. It has link to the YouTube channel, and kind of you can contact me through there, all that kind of stuff.
Very good. Well,
awesome. Well, there's a whole lot of stuff that I wanted to ask about that I never even had a chance to get to. And, we're an hour and a half in, so maybe we could wrangle you into having another conversation with us sometime.
Yeah, sure. I'm perfectly willing to do that.
Awesome.
Well, very good. Well, everyone, Jacob Hansen, and until next time, y'all keep on striving.